Hello everyone and welcome to a new edition of Cellar Talks. Today we're visiting South Africa and we're going to talk to Uva Mira Mountain Vineyards, Christiaan Coetzee, and he's going to talk with us and explain everything about the winery and the region and the wines that they make. So we're just waiting for Christiaan to join us and then we're going to start the show. In the meanwhile, if you're watching and you're having a glass of wine, let us know what you're drinking. Today we are going to drink the Chardonnay by Uva Mira, and I already poured it in the glass, so it's waiting for us. And obviously we're also going to talk about all the other wines that they are producing. So let's see if we can get them. There we go. Hey, Christiaan.
Hey Niels,
How are you doing?
fine yourself.
Yeah, good as well. Good as well. Pleased that you could join us for a nice chat about South Africa and Uva Mira and yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much for the invitation. It's much appreciated. And yeah, great way to start the weekend with a glass of wine.
That's it. That's it. That's what I thought. So I already explained that today we're going to taste one of your wines, but obviously we're going to talk about all of them. Just for the audience watching, we have today the Uva Mira, the Mira Chardonnay. So I'm just going to show it to everybody. Some people might have got their hands on a bottle, so it could be that they're tasting simultaneously with us. And more about this wine and all the other wines later. But maybe we're just going to start with a short introduction from your side. So about yourself, and then we're going to talk about the winery and the region, etc., etc.
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Christiaan Coetzee, and I'm a enologist at Uva Mira Mountain Vineyards. I was at school in Stellenbosch, Niels, at a boys' school, and you know, Stellenbosch is a beautiful little town that's got a great wine culture. So I was exposed to the wine industry from a relatively young age. And I actually wanted to study nature conservation, and my parents told me I must find a real job. So I decided I'll definitely then go for winemaking. And I studied winemaking, viticulture and enology at Elsenburg Cape Institute for Agricultural Training. And I graduated in 2008. And then in 2009, I did my first vintage in South Africa at Grainbeck Wines in Robertson, under Peter Ferreira, who was the cellar master at the time. He that year then arranged a harvest for me in Champagne, also in that same year. So I traveled to Boozy, little town, and I did a vintage there with a lovely family at Champagne John Vazel. After the vintage, I stayed on a bit, and then I traveled to Germany to a friend of mine, Bernd Schaefer, where I did a vintage in the Pfalz region, a small little town called Edenkoben, and Weingut Schaefer, small Schaefer, not the big one. And then I traveled back to South Africa in 2010. I did a vintage at one of the Stell's wineries called Nederburg in Nepal. And later that year, I joined the KWV winemaking team until 2012 December, when I joined then finally Uva Mira Mountain Vineyards. Yeah. And 2022 then marked my 10th vintage year on the property.
Okay, so you got already quite some experience despite the young age, I would say. So you first got your hands on sparkling wines, and then at some point you also wanted to branch out a little bit. And now there's no sparkling at the moment, or is there? Or is there maybe a project coming up for that?
There's no sparkling wine at the moment. We might in the future, you know, make a small.
You got the grapes, so.
Couple of thousand bottles maybe as a side project for functions for the bigger business, but at the moment no sparkling wine. No.
Okay. Yeah. but like I said, in the meanwhile, you had quite some different experiences. So although the
Yeah,
start
yeah.
was there, now it's quite diverse. We can say. For the people that are watching, if you have a question, I always repeat, you can just put them in the chat. I'll just pick them up. At the end, we're also going to do a final round of questions if there are. Yeah, like in the middle, we're gonna taste the Chardonnay. I already put it in the glass, so it's waiting. But let's talk a little bit about your region first. So, Stellenbosch, you already mentioned you're from there, but specifically, let's talk first about Stellenbosch and then the Helderberg and where you guys are located. Because for the people that don't really know a lot about Stellenbosch, it might be good to give a little bit of an overview of that part of South Africa.
Yeah. Yeah, Stellenbosch, just to give you an indication for the people who are watching around the world, maybe it sits about probably 50 kilometers east of Cape Town. And we fall into the coastal region, really. It's really a diverse wine growing region with many different microclimates and macro and microclimates.
Mm-hmm.
Stellenbosch is so diverse that it can literally produce everything. It really does well in varieties like Chardonnay, Chenin Blanc, and Cabernet Sauvignon. And then certain pockets does well in Cabernet Franc as well. It's very much influenced by the ocean if you go to certain pockets. And other pockets, in general, the region itself, South Africa actually in general is really spoiled with soil. We've got some of the oldest wine producing soils in the world. Some date back 600 million years. And, also in terms of soil, it's so diverse. So it's a very diverse region. And, if I had to talk about climate, I would probably, talk about our own climate because that's what I know and I've got experience with. The other climates is very different. And as you know, it takes you 10 years to understand climate on a property.
And you have a very specific location in the area. I already mentioned Helderberg mountain, but if you go to Stellenbosch, there is I think, correct me if I'm wrong, there's around 5 different subzones, or can we call it like that, or how is that divided in the area?
Yes, it's divided into you've got different wards. Got different wards. I have to count now. I'm not exactly the amount that there is, currently registered. But yeah, there's various different wards. That's basically smaller demarcations of specific farms that's sort of grouped together. That's got the same natural sort of environment and terroir, if you want to use the word. And those are then demarcated. Let's say the ward Simonse or Bottleray and so forth.
So what you will see is that there are obviously a lot of wineries over there in a relatively small area. It's already for a long time, it's been dominated by some, let's say, wine houses that are well known and have established themselves. But now already a lot of things are changing, because if we look at Uva Mira, the project is not that old yet. So how did you guys end up in that specific part on Helderberg, and when did it start? When did the project start?
So look, the property itself was bought by Desmond and Denise Whedon in 1993 from a Mr. Van Sale, and they bought about 127 hectares from the Groenerivier property back then. This part of the property, of the Groenerivier property, was undeveloped. I think it had 1 or 2 vineyards, which was Sauvignon Blanc, which was 1986 plantings. And then they planted the first vineyard in 1994.
Okay.
1995. The property got its name in 1994. It was the grandson that studied Latin, gave the name Uva Mira, which translates to the wonderful grape. Uva meaning grape and Mira meaning miraculous. And then in 2004, the first commercial wine was released. And then in 2014, Mr. Toby Venter, who is the CEO of Porsche South Africa, acquired the property. And so, a huge amount of money has been invested in this property since he's taken over, especially in the biological assets, plant material.
So
Yeah, we
in the
ended up.
last 20 years, quite some changes still, and then especially after 2014, you said, when Toby.
Yes, quite a lot of investments in the vineyards. Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
there is an let's say original. I don't know if you still use that part of those vineyards. There is some vineyards that are a little bit older, but most of them they come from the 90s, and then later on in the 2000s, then you started 2010s, you started planting new varieties also. Well,
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
so what are the varieties that you currently are cultivating? So what are the main varieties that you guys have there?
Yeah, so we have 5 varieties on the property, and the focus is really on 3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
So when I started here, we actually had 6 varieties. So we used to have Merlot on the property as well, and we uprooted the last Merlot last year.
Yeah.
So now we left with 5 varieties, which is Chardonnay, which is one of our big focuses.
Yeah.
And then we also focus on Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's 1 or 2 pockets on the property that really lends itself to Syrah. There's up against the mountain. There's really small pockets of Table Mountain sandstone that you really have to plant Syrah there almost. And so those are planted with Syrah. But the rest of
You've
the
got a
property,
nice playground there. You've got all these different pockets, like you said. So you can say, okay, now we have a project here, and well, if the company allows you to invest in parts like that, then there's a lot of things happening within the winery.
absolutely, yeah. No,
Although you
it's
have
a
the
real,
focus, like you said, there is a clear focus on the Chardonnay and the Cabernet.
absolutely, yeah.
So just for the people showing today, like I said, we have one of the Chardonnays. We'll go through the lineup in a little bit. I also have the Cabernet Sauvignon, just for everybody to show, which I will review at a later stage, so that will show up as well. So today we're going to limit ourselves to one wine to taste and to drink. What would be if you what could walk us a little bit through this lineup that you have at the moment? How is that build up? So is there different levels or within the different Chardonnays and Cabernets that you guys have?
Sure. Yeah, maybe Niels, just to get back to the climate, if you look more specifically to our climate, just before we get to the range,
Yep.
because the people will better understand the range and what they can expect from the range if they understand our climate. So you enter the property at about, the name says Uva Mira Mountain Vineyards, and the name states exactly where we are against the mountain, the Helderberg, as you mentioned.
Yep.
So you enter the property at about 250 meters above sea level. And the property goes up all the way to about 620 meters above sea level.
Yeah.
And as you all know, and the listeners know, that for every 100 meters you go above sea level, your annual average temperature drops by about 1 degree Celsius.
Yeah.
So the higher you go, the cooler it gets. Niels, we're also only 9 kilometers from the Atlantic Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And our prevailing wind comes straight from the Atlantic Ocean. And it's really a unique combination of high altitude and proximity to the ocean that gives us this really cool climate.
Yeah.
You can go to a lot of places around the world, like Chile, Argentina. They've got high altitudes. There's probably places that's closer to the ocean, but there are really very few properties that's got the combination of altitude and the proximity to the ocean that really gives us this unique climate.
Yeah.
Uva Mira also has got an annual rainfall of about 800 millimeters rain per year. Which gives us this really cool climate in terms of soil temperature.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a combination of altitude, proximity, and cooler soils that then gives us this really nice, cool climate. This translates directly to what style of wine we can produce, because cooler climates means you've got a very slow ripening period, and that directly translates to wine style.
Yep.
Typically in your white wines, you'll find that the wines are really pure, really elegant. It's got natural high acidities. It's got great ageability. And then the red wines, the biggest differentiation for me between cooler and warmer climates is the tannin structure.
Mm-hmm.
You'll find that the red wines are really, really silky in tannins, really pure, silky tannins, yet it's really powerful. And you do find quite a lot of sort of minerality almost in the red wines as well, with very fresh flavor profile opposed to the riper flavor profiles you find maybe in the warmer climates.
So it's happy drinking, as we would say.
Happy drinking. You could finish the bottle, you know. You don't have to only enjoy a glass of wine.
That's good, that's good. I see Pardon is watching, you know, him as well, and he says, arguably the best chance on Sauvignon Blanc New World in the country so far. So yeah, there's a lot of people that give you praise. I'm just interrupting you now, because we're going into the lineup, but tagging on that, you're getting more and more recognition with all these different wines, huh? Also, Tim Atkin is year on year improved with the ratings on that.
Yes. Yeah, we've been lucky once or twice.
I know. You can say you got lucky once, and then the twice I don't believe. I mean, after a second one, then it's also there's some skill in there. Okay, so there's the let's say ideal location situation that you have. You have the altitude, you have the ocean climate that comes there. Great work for the acidity and for the ripening of the grapes, and then add that to all those soil types that you have, that also give you the opportunity to create different wines. So how does that then translate in your portfolio then?
Yes, so currently we've got 11 wines in the portfolio. And I think that also tells a bit of what we do. You know, we don't just make one Sauvignon from all the vineyards. It's really what we do in the vineyards is we really sort of demarcate specific pockets within the vineyards, and we vinify these pockets individually and make really style-specific wines. So to give you an indication, on the Sauvignon Blanc, we produce 2 different Sauvignons, and we've got 2 different ranges basically. The one is called the Mira collection, and those are all our first offerings in terms of varieties. And then we have another range that's actually called the Nines collection, but we don't advertise it as that, and that's all our top-end wines that's really made in small production, small volumes, and really sort of special vineyards. So we make 2 different Sauvignon Blancs. The one is called the Mira Sauvignon Blanc, and the other one called the Singewing. It's got a beautiful story. Singewing being, you know, a wine produced from 2 specific parcels of Sauvignon Blanc higher up on the property, really old clones. And then we also produce 3 different Chardonnays. I mentioned Chardonnay being, you know, one of our specialities. So stylistically, the Chardonnays are very different, and we have various vineyards of Chardonnay on the property, and the 2 top wines actually come predominantly from the same vineyard, where the Mira Chardonnay we'll be having tonight then comes from a combination of all the vineyards. Okay. A lot of people then think, you know, when you say, yeah, but you know, the Mira Chardonnay is just, you take the rest of the vineyard, you put it all in a bottle. It's really not the case. No.
The same amount of hard work and passion goes in that.
We make use of a lot of technology on the property, Neil. So, you know, every vineyard, all the soils, first of all, we do electroconductivity scan on all these soils that gives you variation in soils. And then we take satellite images or drone images these days, NDVI photos, which is normalized differential vegetation index photos of the vineyards. And we overlap these 2, and you get the variation in the vineyards, and you can then see why there is variation in the vineyards. Each of those specific pockets are then specifically demarcated. So let's say you have 1 hectare of Chardonnay. In that vineyard, you could have 1, 2, or 3 different pockets. We demarcate them. We vinify, pick them on different dates, purely based on taste. We vinify them individually in specific barrels. And then at the end of the day, you might end up with 1 hectare of vineyard, but there could be 5 or 6 or 7 different parcels. You know,
so, but you never really know when you start how it's going to end up in the end.
Sure, exactly. And I like to mention this to people because a lot of people's got the idea that the Mira Chardonnay is just a wine that everything is put together. It's really not the case. Everything is still picked on phenolic ripeness, purely on taste, and vinified individually and then blended at the end. And the Mira Chardonnay, which is our first offering, is a very elegant style of Chardonnay. It's oat. It's fermented in barrel, kept in barrel for about 9 months. And we don't have a recipe in terms of percentage of new oak or, natural fermentation.
So that varies per vintage as well.
Exactly. That's all adjusted per vintage. This current vintage, for instance, which we'll get to later, but the style of this wine is very lightly oat, very elegant, very refreshing, and it's really to show people what Chardonnay can be. Chardonnay inherently is actually a very neutral variety. It doesn't have the flavor profile of a Sauvignon Blanc, for instance, but according to me, it's the most noble white variety in the world. The Germans might differ, but that's my opinion.
They have another one which starts with the R, but let's not go into that debate with them.
Yes. Then after the Mira Chardonnay...
But you guys, so just to interrupt you, but you really are a high-tech winery. So if you listen to all this technology and all the work that goes into it before you start picking the grapes, there's so much more that you guys do if you compare it to, I've had quite some wineries and also in the talk show, and a lot of it is still being done also on, I would say, collective memory, especially if you go to really old family-owned vineyards, wineries that have been there for centuries. They just know in their head, okay, this is the vineyard and this is how this part goes and this is how that goes. But you started on a very different foot, and you continue developing that with technology to learn more and learn quicker as well, maybe, from the vineyards that you guys have.
Absolutely. I'm a firm believer in science, Niels, and in technology. And that said, we use it just to make decisions. We don't let it take over the process at all. But it really helps us to make informed decisions. And so we definitely, try to be on the forefront of what is available to use and make use of that. We're also, busy with really 1 or 2 very nice projects, which we'll share with you in a couple of years' time. But it's technology, it's available, so we have to use it.
So so we go back, and we were at the Chardonnay, and we talked about the Mira Chardonnay, which is basically a collection and a representation of the winery and the vineyards that you guys, Chardonnay vineyards that you have. But like you said, done in a way that is really picking the right ingredients, using the right recipe, etc., etc. There's a lot of thinking behind that. That's not just adding them up and creating a sort of an estate wine that, it's just a result of what's available. But then, like you said, you have more. You have 3 Chardonnays, right? If I'm correct?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. So the top 2 Chardonnays is called the single tree Chardonnay. Named after a really beautiful candlewood tree that stands in the middle of this vineyard. And then the other Chardonnay is called the Uva Mira Chardonnay. So they both come from a single vineyard, a registered single vineyard, which is roughly 1.85 hectares. And it's an amazing vineyard. It's got 3 different slopes. The middle section of that vineyard faces slightly north. So in the southern hemisphere, our north-facing slopes are our warmest slopes.
Okay.
And this specific portion or section of the vineyard produces this beautiful, ripe stone fruit, beautiful textured, wines with quite a nice viscosity and beautiful concentration. And then right next to that section in the vineyard, there's a section that faces west towards the ocean. And it's quite interesting. Normally in the southern hemisphere, your west-facing slopes are actually your warmer slopes.
Yeah.
But because of the way the sun rises behind the mountain and the influence of the ocean, because the west-facing slope looks towards the ocean, that's actually our cooler slopes.
So it turns around a little bit, the whole idea.
Yes, exactly, yes. And so this is very interesting. So it's a very small section. It's about 0.2 hectares that we pick individually. It's got this beautiful chalky mineral limey sort of flavor profile. Even if you taste the grapes, you
can start picking them out if you don't tell them. If you do a blind tasting with the grapes, you'll just taste the difference already.
Exactly. And that little parcel is picked individually and vinified, and that goes into the Uva Mira Chardonnay. So the single tree is this beautiful stone fruit, rich, sort of concentrated, yet elegant, and got some minerality, flavor profile. Where the Icon Chardonnay is driven by this minerality, it's got a slight flintiness, beautiful elegance, and just pure Chardonnay.
Okay, yeah. So you got 3 very different Chardonnays, you could say there, all in all. Yeah. And then we won't walk through the whole portfolio, so maybe we want to pick out the Cabernet as well, just to conclude on that before we go in them, and then we're going to start the tasting, because people probably are wondering why is he not drinking the glass, because you have a glass there, and you have one as well. So we should also enjoy it, huh?
I've started drinking before the show, Niels.
Oh, very good. That's how I like it. Good. So the Cabernet, and then we'll go into depth, which is with the Uva Mira, with the Mira Chardonnay. Sorry.
Sure. Yeah. So our Cabernet is a very elegant style of Cabernet Sauvignon. I've mentioned to you the climate on the property. So having that in the back of your mind, you can think of cool climate Cabernet Sauvignon. So it's a wine that's really driven by, it's got a beautiful red fruit flavor profile, with really silky tannins structure. It's got hints of graphite on the nose, and it's a wine that we mature for about 18 months in French oak barrels, of which roughly 40% of the barrels are new. So it's a very elegant style, beautiful concentration. But the key word, once again, being elegance. And it's wine that's got great ageability as well, So depending on what drinking period you like wine most, it's a wine that you can either enjoy 3-4 years after the vintage, or keep it for 20 years in the cellar. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. Oh. Then we have, that's the, is that also named as Mira? This Cabernet, or you have a different?
That is called the Mira Cabernet Sauvignon. Correct.
So it goes in the same collection as the Chardonnay that we mentioned in the Sauvignon as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive a little bit more into the Mira Chardonnay, because we already talked about it. We have today let me just make sure that I do it right. 2020. So I'm just going to cover it once more. Maybe before we go about the wine, the label. Let's talk a little bit about what's on the label, because we missed that part, but there's a star constellation on the label for the people that don't. Maybe it's a little bit small to see, but you can tell here. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, so when we initially started designing this label, we looked at what we have here on the property, and obviously the label's got to be, representative of where we located. And, because of our elevation, we believe that we're quite close to the stars and nature. And that's why we said we wanted to have a sort of a connection with the stars. And we started digging with the label designer, and we came up with this constellation, which is called the Cetus constellation. And within this Cetus constellation, there's a binary star, meaning there's 2 of them that actually called Mira. Yeah. And so that's where the Mira then collection comes from, referring to the name Uva Mira and the star which is called Mira in the Cetus constellation.
Yeah, so you could always easily recognize the Mira collection, because it's on there on the top.
Correct. Yeah.
Just to be sure for everybody that we're not fooling them, because here I have the Mira Cabernet Sauvignon, and it's the same. So that shows you it's the same collection, right? That, by the way, is the 2017, which I will come back on later in a separate review. But today we have the 2020, the Mira Chardonnay. So, let's talk a little bit about maybe the vintage first, and then about the wine itself. And in the meanwhile, I'm going to start enjoying some together with you.
Sure. Yeah, so 2020 vintage was a great vintage. It was a relatively cool vintage. We had slightly less than long-term average rainfall. We had about 750 millimeters of rain that year. And it was quite a dry growing season or ripening period. normally the ripening period that stretches from end of January to the end of March, middle April, we literally had only 23 millimeters of rain, and our long-term average is about 70 millimeters of rain for the growing season, which is actually a very good thing because we make use of drip irrigation, and when it's dry in the growing season or the ripening period, we can control the water better ourselves, opposed to rain falling and we can't do anything about it. As I mentioned, it was a relatively cool growing season, compared to the long-term averages we had, especially after 19 was cooler than 20, but 18 was, what the hottest vintage we've had in this last decade. So really fantastic vintage. The wine itself matured in French oak barrels for about 9 to 10 months, of which 30% of the barrels are new.
Okay.
This specific wine, we have about 40% of the wine went through natural fermentation, and only 5% of the wine went through malolactic fermentation.
Okay.
So the idea behind the malolactics, because it was a slightly cooler season, we just wanted to give the wine a little bit of texture and sort of broadness on the palate. And that's why we brought in the 5% malolactic, just to sort of broaden the palate slightly and give it a bit of texture.
But it's interesting because just to point out here that it shows you that you guys really take the vintage as it is and try to work around that. So it's not like you're controlling it, and like you said, you don't have like a signature or a recipe that you're following. You're really looking, okay, what does this wine, this vintage need, or what do I need to do in the cellar to make this, let's say, shine in its best way. So you talked about the malolactic fermentation, but that's 2020, and it's going to be very different in 2021 probably.
Absolutely, yeah. So we do consider, obviously, each vintage, Niels, it's important for us that the wine reflects the vintage.
Yeah.
So we don't try and make a Coca-Cola, that tastes exactly the same every year. It's got to be expressive of the vintage. But that said, we also, have a style of wine, and we have a customer basis that follow us because of the specific style of wine we produce. So we really try and express the properties best to our ability, and we do that, and also consistency for us is really, really important. So we need to do whatever we can to have a consistent style of wine, although it reflects a specific vintage each year.
And how did your learnings come into play there in the last 10, 20 years in the winery? Because obviously a lot of things changed, and there's new plantings now. Also the vines get older. I mean, at the beginning, obviously there was still a lot of young vines, so it's getting better. They're getting more into the momentum. Just before we go into the rest of that wine, how is this change coming along for you right now?
Well, it's working on a property is always it's a humbling experience. You learn a lot, and it takes a long time. I always say, wine industry, the biggest challenge is time, because you learn so much over time.
So if you do 20 years, you only have 20 tries.
Exactly, and no, I've learned so much, Niels, and I've got so much still to learn on this property, and that's why I'm a firm believer of spending a long time on the property, because that's the only way that you could really, make exceptional wine, is if you understand the property inside out, you understand the specific vineyards, and that unfortunately takes time. So I've learned a great deal, on this property in the last 10 years, and I'm sure I'm going to learn exactly the same amount that I've learned in the last 10 years in the next 10 years. It's a never-ending process, and with that comes technology and
the technology helps you to speed it up a little bit, maybe, because you buy time sort of less with that. You cannot do extra things, but the learning curve maybe goes a little bit quicker.
Sure, yeah.
So then about the wine itself, because obviously we talked about the vintage, and now let's talk a little bit about, for the people that don't have the pleasure of enjoying it right now, what can we expect in terms of style of the wine?
Yeah, I think the wine itself, Niels, the nose for me, the sort of character that stands out is it's got this sort of, the modern word is reductiveness, which some people could perceive as a negative concept, but it's not reductive in the sense of H2S. It's got more gunflint sort of character.
Yeah.
Which is very much, quite modern in terms of Chardonnay styles, very new world. But the wine is got beautiful, the flavor profile for me is very pure. It's got beautiful citrus. You get this orange zest on the nose. You get a little bit of nachi. It's got beautiful, slight limey acidity, beautiful sort of chalky tannin structure, and it's got great length, and also importantly, the wine finishes beautifully dry on the palate.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's as the wine sort of opens up, and I've seen it, it's also sort of got a slight nuttiness on the nose as well,
Yeah.
and on the palate, which is, just adds a bit to the complexity, and yeah, beautiful, refreshing acidity.
So, but then that would be my question. Okay, if we look a little bit, we take the crystal ball and we look a little bit ahead, and obviously you do have some reference there. And when it comes to past vintages, how is the development of the wine? Because it's great to drink right now, and like you said, there is this freshness and the minerality. So don't discard that. I think it's a wine that is good to drink early. There's nothing wrong with that, but obviously there's a second layer behind that, under that.
Yes. Yeah, so Niels, I've had the privilege to open up some of our older vintages recently. We opened up the 2013 Chardonnay, for instance, and it haven't really even started changing color, just to give you an indication. Oh. So we, one of the focuses of the property is really to produce wines that ages really well. And we do everything we can in our ability, apart from the winemaking, also the packaging. So we look at, for instance, the corks we use. The corks we use specifically have got a very low oxygen permeability. So that also contributes to the aging ability of a wine. And these wines age easily 10 plus years. I know that for sure. And then it becomes personal, Neil. So whether you like more the tertiary characters of the wine will probably age 15, 20 years. Yeah. And it's for you then. Yeah, but
it's designed is always a bad word, because people think like, okay, you're trying to steer it in a certain direction, but it's been created, let's put it like that, with keeping in mind that it should have the possibility to go into that decades or 2 decades even.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's definitely our vision for the wines.
Mm-hmm. Great, excellent wine. So I'm not going to tell you too much about what I think about it, because you can read it later when I'm going to write the review, and everybody the same. No, but it's a great wine, and a few episodes, I think a season ago, I had creation wines also in the show, and I think we also had their Chardonnay. To be honest, I think it was the Chardonnay that we tasted. I see some similarities, but also quite a lot of differences. And
sure.
Yeah, this one goes next to that, and that's also a very an excellent wine. So I think quality-wise, I'm impressed. And like I said before, I also noticed that things are picking up, and then saying that for you guys is not like that you've been doing bad in the previous years, but you can see there is more noise around Uva Mira and about the wine. So yeah, it shows that you're really going in the right direction, in the great path with these wines. Yeah.
Thank you, Niels. Yeah.
What's the availability of the wines before we? I have some more questions, but let's talk a little bit about availability. South Africa, obviously, but if people who are not in South Africa would want it, we have some importer in the Netherlands. But where do you export to at the moment?
Niels, we currently we got the distribution in about 17 different countries.
Okay.
So in Europe, we are in Germany, in Belgium, Denmark, Luxembourg, obviously the Netherlands, and then Switzerland, and United Kingdom, in the UK. And then we're also in China.
Okay.
We are in Mauritius. We're also in Namibia, locally in Africa. Australia, Canada. Yeah, so
there
we've
is
got
not much pockets of the world where you're not. I mean, I know USA might be a difficult one because there's a lot of Chardonnay there as well, and also cool climate Chardonnay as well. So I don't know if that's really going to add. Obviously, you can always add something to the market, but
we actually are in the United States. We with Cape Ada, which is an online company,
yeah,
which actually serves the majority of the states in the United States.
perfect.
So yeah, we pretty much well represented around the world. We're obviously always open for more business.
Yeah.
So if any distributor is looking, you're welcome to
But the
contact us.
people in Europe, they're well served because, like you already mentioned, the countries, but there's hardly any countries that don't have their own direct channel now at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. And so obviously the Netherlands, we also really well represented. So.
Good. Let's go a little bit into questions. I think I prepared you well with a question from the guest that we had in the last episode. So that was about 3 weeks ago, I think now. There was some, I always ask my guests, do you have a question? And is there something that you want to ask our next guest? And we were talking with the guys from Gramona, and I think they have quite some similarities, but also obviously Spain, where they're located in the north of Spain, it's a very different kind of wine country. So I think when we talk about climate, that was the question. Obviously, I get a lot of these questions about climate to ask to other winemakers, but more specifically, the question was the location that you guys have. So with the mountain, Helderberg Mountain, etc., and the choices that you make in terms of the varieties that you grow and plant. How does that play into the climate change? Because is there a philosophy behind that? And the choices that you make, why do you make the choices? And is there something in the future that you want to work towards when it comes to climate?
Yes. Yeah, Niels, it's climate change is obviously, when I talk about climate change, I can only refer to what we experience locally, and I'm not talking on behalf of the rest of the wine world. And only referencing what we're experiencing. So we definitely obviously experiencing, it's a very relevant question. First of all, thank you for the question. If you're watching, I always say, I don't foresee that in the next 20 to 25 years, we'll find ourselves in a situation locally where the varieties that we're currently planting will become obsolete or impossible to grow. I think, people locally, the brand is very much sort of connected to what wines they produce and what varieties they grow. So if you now all of a sudden are known for Chardonnay and you pull out all the Chardonnay, start planting Roussanne, you might as well change your brand.
Yeah.
So I think people's got to be very wary of the way they approach global warming. I think there's a lot of other ways to adapt to global warming opposed to changing varieties. You could use drought-resistant rootstocks, for instance. Water management, I think, is going to become key going forward with global warming. And then I must say that, I think high-lying vineyards and vineyards closer to the ocean will become more sought after because they naturally buffered against global warming, just because geographically how they're situated. And we're very fortunate in that sense that we've got both. We've got high altitude and the proximity. So, the plantings that we've done the last 5 years, we've all planted with drought-resistant rootstocks.
Yep.
And we are busy with a very nice irrigation project that really focuses on precision irrigation. And I think that will definitely...
In terms of preparation, that this is the answer that you're already giving. This is what you already have been working on from the start on, more or less.
Sure. Yeah. So we've definitely taken it into consideration. And I think the answer is just to think it carefully through and see what sort of what other ways you can adapt opposed to just changing.
You already mentioned Stellenbosch and also where you guys are located. There is a lot of options still when it comes to varieties, and so you still have some room to go left and right. But like you said, if you have a Chardonnay focus, it's not like at some point you can ditch the Chardonnay and say, okay, we're going to go focus on I don't know, Chenin Blanc. If you've never done it, then nobody recognizes you for that as well. So
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so then I just straight on go to the question for our next guest for next week that I've passed to you, and then we're going to go to Costa Rica winery, and they're one of the, I would say, more well-known producers of rosé wines in particular. So they also have their focus, but really on rosé wines, and at Lake Garda. So yeah, beautiful place, but also very special microclimate because of the lake there is in the winter. I think it's never below 10 degrees Celsius there because there's a big body of water that keeps the vineyards good there. What would be a question that you want to ask them? And it can be anything. It can be about the vineyards, about the wines, but also business side of the winery. Is there anything that you want me to ask them next week?
Yes, I would like to ask, first of all, I think it's Nicole.
Yeah, Nicole.
Yeah, I would like to ask what a perception is in terms of South African, the quality of South African wine, and also what was the biggest contributing factor that shaped that perception of the South African wine for her?
Okay. I think it's a great question because, well, we're going to Italy. So obviously, if you talk about wine countries, Italy is one of the old the old world wine countries, but also one of the countries that is synonymous, I would say, to wine. So yeah, they have a lot of how do you call it? Indigenous grapes. I always say it's the land of the 1,001 grapes. You can around the corner and find another one, and they still find more new ones that they keep bringing back to life. So it's interesting to see what their perception is of South Africa and South African wine. So great question. I'm just going to pass it on to her. So we talked a little bit about what you guys are doing right now. Is there any, you already hinted a little bit to that, there is some other projects or things that you're working on for the future. Maybe it's not something that you can disclose, but there's always, yeah, you're always innovative. We talked about technology, but also in terms of portfolio and in terms of the vineyards. Is there something on the short term where you think, okay, this is something that I'm already putting my hands on that will come up?
Yeah, look, yeah, we're busy with quite a lot of projects, Niels. We actually planting some more vineyards this year, which is really, really exciting. We've got this really cool climate spots right at the top of the property, which they used to stand Sauvignon Blanc, which is now being converted to Chardonnay. Okay. So that's really, really, really exciting. It's something we've envisioned for quite some time, and now it's realizing this year.
So altitude, how does that play out compared to the vineyards Chardonnay vineyards that you already have? What's the difference? How much will we go up?
Currently, the Chardonnay, the highest Chardonnay lying vineyard sits at about 400, 450, and that will go up to about 500, 550 meters. So it's quite high, and it's also really well sheltered against the wind. So it's just it's like a textbook, little spot for Chardonnay, which is very, very exciting. And yeah, other than that, we busy in the cellar. It's busy with malolactic fermentations. Everything's going. You
always
well.
Have your small barrels around the corner or something brewing.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, there's so much actually going on, Niels. Yeah.
And I can't imagine. We started in the beginning of the interview, but I can't imagine that you will not get to that sparkling at some point. There must be commercial, not just for your private project, because obviously you're probably doing that.
Yeah, no, you must watch the space.
Very good. I like that. Good. So maybe for the people that are watching, if you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat. I will just pick them up before we start rounding up the interview. Let me ask you something about because you asked a question about perception of South African wines, and let's make it a little bit more specific. And I will ask you a question about Stellenbosch. What do you think? We already talked about that, and I mentioned that there are quite some old wineries there that have shaped the South African wine industry, but there's a lot of new stuff. So let's compare that with Uva Mira and other projects that have been started in the last 2 decades, or maybe just starting right now. What is the direction where you see that Stellenbosch is going in that sense?
Look, Stellenbosch has got such a rich history, Niels. I mean, we've got the oldest wineries in the country. And as you mentioned, you know, it's really the heartbeat of the South African wine industry. It shaped the South African wine industry. And I can only see it going from strength to strength. You know, you look at the last 5 to 10 years, I've seen, you know, quite a lot of investment in the region. And I think there's some great initiatives going on, something like the Cabernet Sauvignon Collective. You know, people are definitely getting more focused. I think the region has had some time to think of what really works well. Yeah. And I think slowly but surely you could see that there's great direction, and people are starting to focus more on specific varieties that they've over time learned that really work well in the region. Yeah. So I can only see Stellenbosch going from strength to strength, and it will, you know, probably become more well known worldwide. And I think, you know, the wines, we don't have to talk about the quality of the wines. They're world class, and we can only hope that it sort of, you know, in the next 10 to 20 years get the recognition that it really deserves. Yeah. So I'm very optimistic.
So maybe stepping away a little bit from the old image that they had, and maybe be a little bit more innovative is the wrong word, but diversify a little bit more, and also show the world that there is more, also maybe vineyards, single plots, etc., stuff like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, the focus is really, you know, as I mentioned, there's a lot more focus, I think, on specific vineyards, specific cultivars, and I think you can expect really great things from Stellenbosch in the next 10 to 20 years, for sure.
Good. A question that I got in: what is in terms of the production that you're doing right now? Because we totally missed that in the beginning. But what's the size of the winery in terms of vineyard hectares and the production that you on average do per year at the moment?
Yeah, we've got roughly currently we have only about 23 hectares. We uprooted quite a lot because of the planting program. We used to have about 30 hectares, and we produce between 100 and 120,000 bottles a year.
Okay. Yeah. And like we said, there is some different lines, but also when we go to the Chardonnay, we pick the top level Chardonnay. That's really a small plot, so there's bigger contributors, but there's also the really small ones in there as well. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, some of the productions are 2,000 bottles. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the reason why I was asking about Stellenbosch is also because, well, we talk about South Africa and the image South African wines, but there's also a lot of local competition or nationwide competition coming along. If we talk about Swartland, or we talk about Creation, for instance, Hermanus, we're talking about, let's say, the diversity of what South Africa has to offer in terms of wine in the last 1-2 decades has also massively grown. So do you sometimes feel, I mean, in my opinion, that would be a good thing, because, I mean, it makes the country richer and what it has to offer. Maybe you have a different view on that.
No, I think you're right, Niels. I mean, South Africa, there's really there's a lot of beautiful wine regions and a lot of regions that produces really good wine. But, you know, as a region, as Stellenbosch, we welcome competition because that drives us and pushes us to the next level. And I think it's a healthy, you know, if you don't have competition, you become complacent and stagnant in what you do. So competition, we welcome competition, and you're right, there are other regions that does really well, but we will keep up.
Maybe really a blessing is a big word, but maybe it's sort of a blessing because, like you said, for a long time, Stellenbosch has been like on top of the mountain, and like, okay, these are the guys that you all look up to, and then you start to get lazy as a region because, I mean, if you're on the top, nobody thinks about competition because we're doing great and everybody knows the brand Stellenbosch, etc. For now, there's work to be done, and you need to keep up.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right, and yeah.
So, what about other regions? Is there, obviously now you have to say Stellenbosch is my favorite region. I have no other ones, but what are your personal maybe regions or projects or wineries where you think like this is something where I think that showed in the last 10, 20 years that's really becoming interesting for South Africa in terms of wine?
I think the Hemel Ade has done exceptionally well in in identifying what they're good at. Driven by Sean and Pinot, and I think that region has done really well for itself. There's some beautiful wines coming from the regions. There's beautiful wineries. I think great experiences going to the valley, and so I think they've done really well. But so has the Swartland, and I think South Africa as a whole, as a country, I think the regions have started to sort of they've identified what they're good at, and people have started focusing on that. So I think we as an industry are maturing, and that's great to see because it will only take us forward.
I think it's really a good thing for the country and for the wine business because if you would have been competing on the world stage as you were doing, let's say until 10, 20 years ago, at some point you have to start thinking, okay, how can we on a world stage make a difference and have people pick the South African wines and maybe not the French one and change for an instance. And now there is more options. The quality obviously also has gone up. Technology can help you there, but there's also young winemakers that want to try new stuff and also not limited to having to do it in the way that's been done for decades. So yeah.
Sure.
Good. I don't think we have any other questions, so unless somebody now pops in, I just want to mention that it's been a pleasure talking to you, and we had a great Chardonnay. Just going to show it once more to the people. So this is the Mira, and this is the one that we tasted today, which we're going to review later as well. And altitude we talked about is a big in all wines. It's a big thing. But also the different soil types, the climates that you have with the ocean. So there's a lot of things going on in the winery and in the portfolio. I don't think people will get bored if they come for a tasting at Uva Mira because there's so much to discover that you probably need a whole day to walk through the whole assortment. But it's been great talking to you. And like I said, we also have the Cabernet, which we're going to review later. So I wanted to thank you, and maybe some last words from you before we round it up.
Thanks, Neil. Thank you for the opportunity once again. I really appreciate your time. Thank you also to the viewers, and make sure you get a bottle of Uva Mira wine, and I look forward to your review of the Cabernet Sauvignon. Thanks, Neil.
That's it. Okay, so next week we are going to be back. We're going to talk to Nicole, as you mentioned. So we're going to go to Costa Rica winery in Italy. So very different country, different wines because they also have a focus, but their focus is even smaller because their focus is rosé wines. And we're going to ask her the question what she thinks about South Africa wines and the place that South African wines hold on the world stage. So let's see what she comes up with in terms of the answer. And thank you for your time, and thank you for all the insights that you've given us. And looking forward to taste more of your great wines in the future.
Thanks, Neil. Cheers.
Cheers, and thanks everybody for watching. Next week we're going to be back with rosé wine in the glass. So I hope the weather is as good as it is today, because nothing better than enjoying a nice glass of white or a rosé with some sunshine. Thanks, and enjoy your weekend already.
Same to you. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.